In June 2024, a wave of dramatic claims spread across Chinese language social media, capturing the imagination of millions of readers. According to these viral posts, Saudi Arabia had just ended a historic economic arrangement with the United States, a deal that allegedly forced the kingdom to sell oil only in US dollars. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The narrative suggested that the so-called petrodollar agreement, which began in 1974 and supposedly lasted 50 years, had quietly expired and would not be renewed. To many, this sounded like a momentous turning point in world affairs, a financial earthquake that could topple the US dollar from its position as the backbone of global energy trade. The story resonated strongly, not only because it touched on the sensitive question of America's economic dominance but also because it aligned with ongoing speculation about de-dollarization, the idea that the world is gradually moving away from its reliance on the greenback. Yet as soon as experts began to look more closely, the narrative began to unravel. The truth is that no such formal treaty has ever existed. There has never been a legal agreement binding Saudi Arabia to sell its oil in dollars, no signed document requiring the use of US currency in energy transactions, and no official expiration date. The claims circulating on social media were rooted more in myth than in fact, though they contained enough historical fragments to appear convincing. What did exist, however, was an informal understanding forged in the mid-1970s, a quiet but consequential bargain that reshaped the global economy and ensured the dollar's dominance for decades to come. To understand why the rumor gained traction in 2024, it is important to revisit the global context of the early 1970s. The US was facing immense financial and geopolitical strain. In 1971, President Richard Nixon abandoned the Bretton Woods system, ending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. For decades, this system had guaranteed the stability of international trade by pegging currencies to the dollar and the dollar to gold. Its collapse left the global financial system in flux and raised doubts about whether the dollar could retain its central role. At almost the same time, the Yom Kippur War of 1973 triggered an oil embargo by Arab producers against the United States and its allies, causing oil prices to quadruple. Western economies plunged into crisis, inflation soared, and dependence on Middle Eastern energy became painfully clear. It was in this climate of economic turbulence and energy insecurity that the United States turned to Saudi Arabia. In 1974, an informal deal was struck. Riyadh agreed to price its oil exports exclusively in US dollars and to reinvest much of the revenue into US Treasury securities and financial markets. In return, the United States provided Saudi Arabia with advanced military hardware, security guarantees, and assistance for modernization projects. Although never codified in a treaty, this understanding created what came to be known as the petrodollar system. The implications were enormous. By ensuring that the world's largest oil producers sold energy only in dollars, the arrangement cemented the greenback as the global reserve currency. Any nation wishing to buy oil, whether in Europe, Asia, or Africa, needed dollars, which in turn reinforced demand for US currency and American debt. This system, while unofficial, had far-reaching consequences. It allowed the US government to run large deficits without facing the same kind of financial risks that other countries encountered. It expanded Washington's leverage in international politics, since access to dollar-based systems became a critical lifeline for every oil-importing economy. Over time, it gave the United States a formidable sanctions tool, allowing it to exert pressure on adversaries simply by restricting access to dollar-clearing networks and financial institutions. The U.S. Treasury became a powerful instrument of foreign policy, in part because of this informal arrangement with Saudi Arabia. The confusion that surfaced in 2024 about a 50-year agreement came largely from the existence of the United States-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. This body was created in June 1974, the same year the informal oil-dollar bargain took shape. The commission was tasked with facilitating Saudi development projects with U.S. expertise, helping the kingdom invest its growing oil revenues in infrastructure and modernization. When the commission formally expired on June 9, 2024, some observers mistakenly linked it to the end of a supposed binding agreement on oil sales. Social media posts exaggerated the event, declaring that the petrodollar agreement had reached its expiration date. Yet officials and experts quickly clarified that this was a misinterpretation. A 1979 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office had already established that no such oil-dollar contract ever existed. Researchers at institutions like the American Institute of Economic Research echoed this conclusion, pointing out that the dollar's dominance in oil trade emerged from practice and strategy, not from legal compulsion. Even without a treaty, the informal system proved extraordinarily durable. For nearly 50 years, Saudi Arabia priced and sold its oil in dollars, and other OPEC members followed suit. Global energy markets became almost inseparable from the dollar, and this habit reinforced itself over time. Buyers trusted the stability and liquidity of the U.S. currency. Sellers valued the security and global acceptance of their revenues. As a result, even when opportunities to diversify emerged, the system remained largely intact. Nevertheless, speculation about de-dollarization has been growing in recent years. China, now the world's largest oil importer, has openly encouraged its trading partners to settle energy deals in yuan. Russia, heavily sanctioned by the West after its invasion of Ukraine, has shifted much of its trade toward rubles and yuan. Members of the BRICS bloc have discussed alternatives to the dollar-dominated system, presenting the idea as a step toward a more multipolar financial order. Saudi Arabia, too, has occasionally signaled openness to alternatives. In 2023, Saudi officials suggested that the kingdom would be willing to accept other currencies for oil transactions if partners requested it. Reports also show that non-dollar oil trade is not entirely new. According to the Wall Street Journal, around 20% of global oil transactions in 2023 were conducted in currencies other than the dollar. Economists note that this includes barter arrangements, yuan-denominated deals with China, and ruble-based trade with Russia. Paul Donovan, chief economist at UBS Global Wealth Management, observed that such diversification has always existed on the margins, even if the dollar still dominates overall. Despite this, Saudi Arabia continues to sell its oil exclusively in dollars. Public records of transactions show no examples of Saudi oil exports being priced in yuan, euros, or any other currency. The practical reasons are clear. The dollar remains the most liquid, widely accepted, and trusted currency for large-scale trade. It offers stability that few others can match, particularly in volatile energy markets. For Riyadh, abandoning the dollar entirely would risk destabilizing its financial reserves and complicating relationships with major partners. The viral rumor of June 2024 therefore reveals more about public perception than about actual policy. The notion that a 50-year petrodollar treaty had expired played into widespread anxieties about American decline and Chinese ascendancy. It also tapped into genuine global conversations about the long-term future of the dollar. Yet the reality remains that the petrodollar system, though informal, endures because it serves the interests of both sellers and buyers. The persistence of these rumors illustrates how history and myth often become intertwined, especially in the realm of international finance where secrecy, strategy, and speculation are common. The U.S.-Saudi arrangement of 1974 was never written into law, but it reshaped the world order. The Joint Commission expired in 2024, but the system of dollar-based oil sales has not. The dollar's supremacy may face gradual challenges in the years ahead, but its position is not easily overturned. It rests not on a single treaty but on decades of habit, infrastructure, and mutual reliance. For now, the petrodollar endures, not because it is enforced by law, but because it remains the most practical foundation of global energy trade. The story of how oil and the dollar became inseparably linked begins not with Saudi Arabia alone, but with the unraveling of an entire global system that had defined the post-war era. The decades after World War II had been dominated by the Bretton Woods framework, a monetary order negotiated in 1944 that tied the currencies of the world to the US dollar, and the dollar itself to gold. The arrangement was meant to restore stability to international markets shattered by depression and war, giving governments the ability to manage exchange rates while ensuring the dollar remained trustworthy because it could be redeemed for gold at a fixed rate. For a generation, this system gave the United States unmatched financial influence, because the dollar became the anchor of trade and investment everywhere. But by the late 1960s,